Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to take a few moments to let people trickle in. Then we can get started in a bit here. Nice to see so many people here today. And you'll see it's spooky season, so our speakers have chosen appropriate backgrounds. You may notice a little bit of theming to our PowerPoints here today. So yeah, I think we can get started. I think it's leveling out a little bit. So welcome to Handling for Digitization. My name is Greg Stewart. I'm the Education Programs Manager at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, or CCAHA. I use they and he pronouns. I am, for accessibility's sake, I will say I am a white person with glasses and dark hair, and I'm wearing a pink shirt, and I have two doors and yellow wallpaper behind me. And so just a little bit about our presentation today. Digitization is an important step in improving access to your collection while simultaneously minimizing the frequency of handling that can potentially cause damage to collection items. But when is it safe to prepare fragile documents on your own? And when is it time to call a conservator? Digital archive specialist Kaitlyn Pettengill will be in conversation with Paper Conservator Chloe Houseman to give you practical tips on safeguarding your collection during the digitization process. So before we get to their presentation, just some Zoom housekeeping. You're in Zoom webinar, so your video and audio are turned off, but you can ask questions or make comments to us in the chat. This program is auto closed captioned in English, and you can turn on subtitles with the little CC button in the Zoom toolbar. We're going to have a presentation from our speakers today, followed by Q&A with you, but please feel free to ask questions anytime during the program. And I also just want to say thanks to everyone who sent in questions in advance. Our speakers wanted to use that to kind of structure today's program. But don't worry if you didn't get a chance to submit, or if you think of something spontaneously during the presentation, we'll still leave time at the end, as I said. This program is being recorded, and we'll send a recording as well as the PowerPoint in a follow-up email. So I will say this program was previously funded, or this program series, rather, was previously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, which allowed us to provide high-quality education programs in fulfillment of our mission. So please consider a donation to CCAHA or an institutional membership if that applies to you, and that will help us keep our webinars free of cost to all. Every little bit helps. And Kaitlyn, oh yes, I see you've advanced the next slide. Appreciate that. Just a quick note about the organization that we work for, CCAHA. We are a regional conservation lab and preservation services facility. We're based here in Philly, but we work with organizations and clients all across the country. Our conservators treat paper-based objects like books, photographs, documents, artwork on paper, and more. And our preservation services staff work in the field, providing education programs and helping institutions plan for the future of their collections. The center also offers a wide range of digitization services, as well as fundraising assistance, housing, framing, and more. And you can learn about more what we do on our website, ccha.org. So just a bit more about our speakers today. As Paper Conservator, Chloe Houseman meets with clients, assesses condition and treatment needs, documents finding in reports, and treats a wide range of objects, including art on paper and archival materials. Prior to joining the staff of CCHA in 2018, Chloe worked as a paper conservator at Harvard University Library's Weissman Preservation Center after having previously interned there. She also completed a conservation internship at the National Archives and Records Administration in Washington, D.C. Chloe received an MA in Art Conservation specializing in paper conservation from Queen's University in Canada. She received her BA in Art History from the University of Albany. Chloe is a member of the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works. She previously served on the board of the Philadelphia Area Conservation Association as co-chair and then event chair. So welcome, Chloe. As digital archive specialist, Kaitlyn Pettengill conducts digital preservation assessments and assists with digitization planning for collecting organizations. She advises organizations in the ongoing development, implementation, and operation of their digital preservation programs, as well as on recommendations for the development and implementation of digital preservation strategies, technologies, and procedures. Prior to joining CCHA in 2024, Kaitlyn worked as the digital projects coordinator for the Atwater Kent collection at Drexel University and as the digital services archive at this Historical Society of Pennsylvania. Kaitlyn earned an MLIS, from San Jose State University, where she specialized in digital collections and digital asset management. She also holds an MA degree in art history from the Courtauld Institute of Art in London and a BA in art history and English literature from Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, PA. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kaitlyn and Chloe for the rest of our presentation.
All right. Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Kaitlyn Pettengill, the Digital Archive Specialist at CCHA. And for description purposes, I'm a white woman with blonde curly hair. I'm wearing a gray sweater, and I have the spider image behind me, so I hope nobody is too scared of spiders. I'm thrilled to be joined today by my colleague Chloe to talk to you about digitizing fragile or difficult materials. Chloe?
Thank you, Kaitlyn. Yes, I'm Chloe Houseman, one of the paper conservators here at CCAHA. For description purposes, I'm a white woman wearing large glasses with long brown hair, big earrings that look like bones, and also a cool spiderweb background. It's spooky season and we love that.
Yes. So we leaned into the Halloween theme, but we wanted to stress that while handling fragile documents can be scary, it doesn't have to turn into a horror story. So today we'll hopefully help you to feel confident preparing materials for digitization without advanced knowledge. And thank you to everyone who submitted the questions. We really did our best to address them all. But again, please put anything else that you'd like to know into the chat. So we're going to leave extra time at the end for Q&As. And we also encourage you to share any digitization scary stories that you've encountered.
To scare.
Yeah. So to start with, the paradox of digitization is that it improves access because images can be shared more easily and because you can reduce the handling and exposure of the originals. But obviously, the process of digitizing means that you have to handle them in order to actually do it. So you don't want to do any damage to the originals in the pursuit of the perfect scan or photograph. So I'm really pleased that Chloe's willing to talk to me about handling for digitization so we can attack it from the two opposite sides. Yeah. And the screen you're looking at right now is just a rundown of some of the areas that we're going to be covering. So the first is understanding what damage you could be doing in the digitization process. We've got mechanical damage, chemical damage, and disassociation. So I guess I'll take mechanical damage, which is the physical stress or distortion that could be caused by improper handling, equipment contact. You know, if you have something that's too large on a flatbed and you slam the lid down, that's going to obviously do damage to a fragile paper item. Too much movement during digitization, tearing, creasing, abrasion. If you break a binding or pages become separated, anything like that. That would be mechanical damage. So ways to avoid that are to use cradles and supports and weights, to never force items flat, and to keep any movement really deliberate and supported. So you always want to use both hands, you want to use boards or folders to support things when you're moving them. And if you come up with really efficient workflows, then you can limit repetitive handling. You don't have to rescan something. You don't have to reopen it and close it. You're not doing extra damage because you've streamlined the process.
Yeah, and then as for chemical damage, so as you can see on the slide, that's reactions or residues affecting the material's composition. So this could be a lot of different things, including residues on your hands of like lotions. Maybe you just ate lunch and you've got some hot sauce on there. Could be truly anything. But It could also be like cleaner or adhesive residues transferred from tools or mounts, or your handling surface if it's not clean, fading or heat damage from lighting or scanners, or just environmental damage from the air. Like there are a variety of chemicals in the air we breathe all the time, and some of those, like sulfur specifically, can be harmful to paper. But also corrosion or staining from metal fasteners once they rust. And we're going to talk a little bit more about fasteners later, but it gets nasty. It gets nasty in there, folks.
So the last one
And
that I have on here. Oh,
oh,
sorry.
I was just going to say ways to avoid that. Ways to
Yes, go
avoid
right
that.
ahead.
Make sure you have a clean area, clean your hands, clean your tools. Keep your coffee cup somewhere else.
If you've got something that's got red rot, make sure you clean the scanner off before you put anything else on there.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point that other materials can also affect later materials if they are shedding any grossness.
So moving on to the third one there, which is one that I think people don't, it's not as obvious to people. It's disassociation. So it's, if you have something like those letters that I've got on the screen there, that image is actually from the Bodleian at Oxford University, but it's a bunch of bound letters that have been put back into the envelopes in some cases. Sometimes they're just bound with the envelopes, and I believe that they're all sorted by recipient. So if you were to untie that tie during digitization and change the order, you might lose the connection between the letter itself and the envelope that it came in. So disassociation is the loss of the context, the information that helps you to understand what the object is, to define its meaning and its provenance. And it's very easy to have that happen during digitization if you're trying to move quickly, if you want to scan all the letters at once, then all the envelopes, because it feels like it would speed up the process. It's actually going to do a lot of damage to your collection because you've lost that that connection between those two things that are meant to be housed together. So anytime you're scanning things out of order for efficiency's sake, you have to keep a really close eye on what you're doing so that you know that everything makes it back where it belongs. And as Chloe said, we're going to talk a lot about fasteners later, but one of the issues with removing fasteners is that it does lead to a greater likelihood of disassociation. And the ways to mitigate that are to always maintain original order, to be careful about keeping things together with the folders that they came from, knowing always where you found them, and to use handling logs and tracking sheets. All right, so I think we've got kind of the three big things to keep in mind as far as the types of damage you could do. So moving on to preparing the work area. We had a question from somebody that said, how do we set up a digitization workbench, equipment, storage, etc.? So I've got kind of the basics here. When we talk about handling during digitization, one of the biggest factors in preventing damage is to make sure that you have a good workspace. You want to have it be well prepared, clean, and you want to make sure that you have enough space to actually do your work. You want to have a smooth area that's neutral, it's non-abrasive, it's easy for you to keep clean, which is one reason that you probably don't want to use wood, because wood is harder to keep clean. I'm sure Chloe can speak to that more than I could. But the federal agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative, FAGI, he's come up with a lot of the guidelines for how we scan the National Archives documents, and then it's replicated by a lot of archives and libraries. They recommend that your digitization area be 6 times the size of whatever material you're working with. And that's obviously a lot easier to achieve when you're working with tiny photographs than when you're trying to do, World War II posters. But the idea still stands that you want to make sure that you have enough space for the object itself, and also for staging. So you want to have kind of the things that are coming up that you're going to be the kind of inbox, what you're actually working on, and then sort of your outbox before you've had a chance to put it back in its proper home. And you also want to make sure that you have room for your scanner or camera and any tools, and that you can move freely without crowding and potentially knocking things over. So it's good to have things be a neutral gray or off-white color because it's better for getting your color quality. You want to avoid patterned or reflective surfaces that could interfere or make it harder to see any dirt that's on the surface of the table. Some institutions will use blotter sheets because you can remove that. It's very easy to replace it if it gets too dusty or worn. You can always see when there's any kind of dirt that's gotten onto that blotter sheet. Lighting should be even, diffuse, without direct glare. LED panel lights are preferred because they emit less heat. They don't risk drying out or warping materials. You want to make sure that you don't have sunlight that's getting in. Maybe your actual collection area is very well blocked from sunlight, but your digitization area is in an office space and you haven't thought about the fact that sunlight's getting in through a window. So make sure you avoid that. Any kind of heat lamps. And always be mindful of the cumulative light exposure over time if you're working with anything that's light sensitive. So people will sometimes ask me if the scanner itself can even do a lot of damage to items. Chloe, do you want to take that one, or I can talk a little bit about it?
Sure, we can tag team this one.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I think it's possible if you are not careful. Like if, for instance, if something has a lot of creases and it doesn't lie perfectly flat, and then you kind of crunch it in a flatbed scanner, that could be causing more damage. Absolutely. You want to be really considerate of that kind of thing.
Yes. I think people ask about the light itself, the scanner light, because we always talk
Oh,
about
this light.
yes. So
Yes.
you always want to avoid, really hot, bright lights if you're using a camera, and you want to make sure that you're not having sunlight exposure. So people will say, can the light in my scanner actually damage something? And
I don't think it's a particular concern for me. So much of light damage is about the dose, over time, right? Like the seconds it takes to scan or photograph something, seconds to minutes, are unlikely to cause any kind of permanent or noticeable damage. So I think doing it one time to then be able to put it in a very dark area is a net good.
Yes. I think the only exception I've ever heard about, and I'm not an expert on early negatives, but I have heard that you have to be careful with acetate and nitrate if you're trying to scan them in some cases. But that's
Yeah,
the
well,
only time
nitrate
I've
is
heard
very
about it.
reactive to heat, so be very careful.
Yes,
I
for
am
many
not a
reasons.
photograph conservator, so not my area of expertise, but I would absolutely uh, defer to those who do know better.
Yes. So moving on to the last one there, which is environment, you want to make sure that it is stable for temperature, and between 65 to 70 degrees is optimal, and between 40 to 50% relative humidity. Fluctuations are obviously the thing to really avoid. You don't want to have a lot of humidity and then like increasing wildly, which I know that you can also talk to about more than I can.
Yeah, I actually do the environmental monitoring at
Mm-hmm.
CCHA, so I'm super familiar with how annoying it is to control your temperature and humidity. But for paper specifically, like if you can control one thing, keep the humidity under 60%, because that's the point at which mold will start to germinate and grow, and that is a huge risk for collections.
Yes. Mold is, I don't know, I was going to try and come up with some sort of Halloween joke there about how mold is, I don't know, the blob. It's just going to replicate and eat your collection, but
it's like a zombie. It will keep coming back
yes.
to life. I'm
Yes.
dead serious.
The other things on there that I've written down are that you want to make sure that it's an area that doesn't have a lot of dust. Some older buildings, if you're in a house museum, obviously you can have some shedding, you can have brick dust, things like that, that could increase the amount of dust you have in an area. But just to do regular house cleaning and make sure that it's a low dust environment. And obviously you don't want to have any food or drink near your scanning area. All right, tool recommendations. Thank you for that photo of your kit there. Do you want to
You're
walk us through
welcome.
what you've laid out?
Sure, yeah, these are just a few of the tools I just had at my bench that I use almost daily. From left to right, top to bottom, we've got a soft brush, micro spatula, a pair of my favorite curved tweezers. Then above the tweezers, there's just a small weight that has been wrapped in book cloth. Then we have a nitrile glove and a slightly bigger micro spatula. I have lots of these guys in different shapes and kind of
Great.
arrangements. But the brush is great for removing any very loose grime or, other, if there's like red rot that's gotten onto something, like a page of a book, just any sort of loose granules or pest leavings. Um, the spatulas are great for like lifting and turning pages. You don't want to kind of like pinch the paper like you might in a book that you own personally. You want to avoid creasing. Same with tweezers, great for careful handling or if you have to align pieces, for instance. Gloves, we have a whole slide about gloves in a minute, so I don't want to spoil too much. But sometimes they're very useful and very important, other times not so much. And the weights can really help to just restrain items that maybe don't lay perfectly flat. And we'll also talk about that a little bit more later. But these are just some basic tools that are pretty easy to get. And even if you can't get these exact things, like even like a butter knife from your kitchen is going to be blunt and thin, uh, and could be used in a very similar way to a micro spatula.
Help you if you're working with a bound volume, you can lift pages, and it's just you can have more delicate, precise movements than with your finger. I think
Exactly.
the other two that we had on there were that are not in the photo are book cradles and foam wedges, which are used to support items that you don't want to force the spine open all the way to lay flat. Can maintain a smaller angle, keep it supported. And then microfiber cloths, which we'll talk a little bit about, which you can use to clean your scanner and your camera. I think the only thing that we didn't mention there was just, unless I missed it, was the kind of brush that we're talking about, right? Because you want to make sure that you are not using an acrylic brush, as being natural bristles, correct?
Yeah, I did not mention that. Yes, I actually have my brush right here. I never put my stuff away. But yeah, it's a very soft, my Zoom background is not cooperating. Very soft fibers that are not going to catch on your item. And always, as with everything we say, use your discretion. Like if something, if like the media is clearly flaking off, maybe don't brush it. Like
Yeah.
rule number one, common sense.
So yes, choose tools that provide extra control, but they don't put any pressure on things. All right, we're moving on to the next one. Caring for the equipment. So one responder asked, do you have any recommendations on cleaning your scanning equipment to prevent damage and to keep dust out of your scans? So I was going to say that cleaning your scanning equipment is just as important as handling the collection carefully. You want to make sure that you don't have dust or residue on your scanning bed. Part of that is because they're going to show up in your images and you might have to redo them, and you want to reduce the number of images you have to redo. And also, residue can scratch the scanner glass over time, and so you definitely don't want to get the glass replaced. So you make sure that you keep it clean. Start with a lint-free or microfiber cloth. You don't want to use paper towels or tissues because they'll leave fibers behind. You want to use a very small amount of cleaning liquid directly onto the cloth itself rather than spraying it onto the surface of your scanner, because the liquid can get around the glass and get on into your scanner, especially if you have one of those Epson XLs. They're so expensive. You definitely don't want to do anything that could impact how well it works. And you don't want to use household cleaners like Windex. Obviously, you don't ever want to let something like Windex even indirectly transfer onto your collection. So the best practice is to use distilled water or a 50-50 mix of distilled water and isopropyl alcohol. Would you agree? Yeah. Just to get the
Yeah, like
conservators.
we use deionized water in the lab, but I know people don't just have deionizing columns in their homes. So distilled water is great. Isopropyl alcohol will help any of that evaporate. And the reason you don't want to use just tap water is that it can, have things in it that are not necessarily dangerous to people, but could cause problems for paper in the long run.
Yes, and if you're doing any kind of cleaning of, say, lantern slides, there's a lot of guides out there. We're not going to speak on that today because we're talking more about paper, but you want to use a similar, deionized water, and a small concentration of isopropyl alcohol is also the way to go about cleaning something like a lantern slide. But there are guides that are written by conservators that can tell you how to do that more safely. You also want to clean any of your camera lenses or sensors very carefully. Make sure that you're using, the lens wipes that are designed for cameras. It's not as you don't have to worry as much about them coming into contact with the collection items as with the scanner bed, obviously, but you still want to make sure that you're taking good care of your camera and you're not letting anything damage the lens. You don't want to use compressed air cans. They can release propellants, and that's not good for anything. You also want to make sure that you are powering down your machines every night, that you're keeping them covered to prevent dust from getting onto them when they're not in use. You don't want to place them near a heater or air vents or an open window. And you want to make sure that you keep your cords organized and off the floor, because if you have one of those nests of wires that we all end up with sometimes, that is both a tripping hazard and a good way to just yank something off onto the floor. You obviously don't want your scanner going flying or your camera.
Yeah, cord management is truly the big horror here today.
Yes.
No one wants evil spaghetti.
I have not heard it called that before, but I love that.
Thank you. That's what I think every time.
So, gloves actually.
I have to give credit to our colleague, Katie, who has given a wonderful presentation with this title that we lifted because it's so ingenious.
And I believe the original can be found on our CCHA YouTube page. So if you search for Gloves Actually CCHA, you can see her full presentation.
Good pop right up, super informative. But the basics of using gloves is for works on paper, don't. For most of the time, you really want to maintain your full manual dexterity. So just having clean, dry hands, just wash them, dry them thoroughly, use them to handle paper because paper is very delicate and it's easy to get caught on things if you can't really feel what you're doing. The only exception for, paper-based items really is photographs. The metals in the photos can really react, and the various layers can react with your fingerprints and oils in your skin and leave marks and damage. So you do want to wear nitrile gloves, not cotton gloves like this spooky ghost that we have here on the slide. And the question in the bottom right asks when do you wear nitrile gloves? For photos, like I said, I just did want to address, we really don't recommend cotton gloves ever. They get dirty quickly. They catch on things really badly. They rarely fit well, and we simply don't recommend them.
Yes, the little the weave of them as well can pull on anything that's got like brittle corners. You can do more damage from that. Whereas like
Brittle
the nitrile, at
corners,
least
catch on fasteners, yeah.
I think the only thing we didn't mention, which is something that I always warn people about, talking about having the clean, dry hands, is that I noticed, and thankfully it was office paperwork and never a collections item, but I did notice one time that the red nail polish that I was using from the corner store or drugstore was not color fast. So if you have any nail polish on, if you enjoy painting your nails, make sure that it is color fast so that it doesn't rub off on any collections materials.
Yeah, and a lot of conservators will say, oh, well, I never wear nail polish. If you are concerned, if you're handling materials often, like I'm wearing nail polish now, but it's a gel polish, which is very color fast, very hard, and not soluble in common conservation, um, any of the solvents that we're using. So for most folks, that would absolutely be a great choice for if you're handling objects frequently.
Just as something that people don't always think about.
Yeah, like if you're wearing nail polish now at home, do a test, like scuff it on a white piece of paper. You can see it. Sometimes there'll be a little transfer.
All right, handling techniques. So when it comes down to handling, a lot of damage can be prevented just by slowing down and thinking things through before you start. Obviously you should have everything staged before you're pulling things out. Make sure that you've got your tools ready, you've got your supports in place so that you can take anything that's got, say, a spine that needs to be supported, and you can put it right down there and adjust. Do you want to add anything there?
Mostly good. Yeah, I feel a lot of this is really just common sense. Like always have your landing area prepared. Like if you're gonna pick something up, know where you're going with it, make sure the space is clean. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen someone go like pick something up, go to their space, and there's a bunch of like tools over it, and they're like, well, what do I do now? Uh,
That or not realizing until you're in the middle of transit that you really should have had somebody else help you to support something. Say,
Yes, if something
I
is large or delicate.
yes, I've worked with a large collection of World War II posters, and even if you're using the board, you might not be able to keep it steady and get to where you're trying to go. Make sure that you have someone else to help you carry something if you might need it, because you do not want to drop or fold or crease something while you're in transit.
Yeah, and make sure the doorways are wide enough.
Yes.
I've run into that before of like, nope, doesn't fit. So you have to have it at an angle, and that requires sort of different prep and materials.
Mm. You don't
All
want it
things that you don't consider
sliding
until
off
you're
onto the
having a
floor.
bad time. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Make sure that while you're handling it, you're supporting the entire object. You want to make sure that you're turning pages slowly from the edge. Try to avoid any sliding or dragging, and try to move as slow and steady as you can. Um, don't do any quick movements, because that's when you could jerk something too quickly. And it
The
seems
paper gets
like,
scared also.
yes. Um, I believe that is good for that one. And then after handling, you want to make sure that you return items to their housings quickly, because obviously, if it sits out for too long at the table, there's a chance for you to misplace it, to forget where it came from. There's that disassociation risk again, or for you to accidentally, do damage or knock something off the table or anything like that. So return things promptly. Write down any condition notes that you need to know, that you need to if something was secure enough to be digitized, but maybe it needs to be flagged for future conservation, that is a great time to do that, and tidy up the workspace to get ready for your next item.
That's a really great point. I think digitization is a wonderful way to view a lot of your collection and figure out what maybe does need additional attention from a conservator.
Yes, I mean, there's some cases where it's actually easier to digitize before it goes to a conservator. Like, say, if the binding is incredibly loose and falling off, maybe you want to try and digitize it when you don't have to be so careful, and then you can send it on to
Yeah,
conservation
definitely.
after the fact, because it's obviously a lot easier to get a good image if the spine is broken, but that is not good long term for that object.
Right, like that's something you want to repair, but it's a little bit of a silver lining situation where you can get really great images, really
Yeah,
flat images of all of those pages,
and
versus, if you have a work of art on paper that's torn into 20 pieces and you're trying to have to play puzzles with it, maybe talk to a conservator first. You'll have an easier time.
and we'll get into situations in a little bit where you can stabilize things yourself versus when you really can't. It really does have to go to somebody who is an expert.
Hmm.
But once you get into a rhythm of everything, it all feels pretty natural. So it's just about being careful and making sure that you're respecting the object in front of you and you're taking good care of
Hmm.
it. All right, removing fasteners. I was excited that somebody asked a question about this one.
It's good stuff.
So somebody asked, what is your position on the removal of staples? Should they be removed when possible or left on the document no matter what?
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit in an earlier slide. As you can see in the picture I have here, something I worked on recently. This isn't a staple, but paper clip, but it's so rusted. It's caused all these rust stains. So certainly if it is causing damage, I recommend to remove fasteners if that you feel safe and confident doing that. Like there are cases where the surrounding paper might be so brittle that it's not recommended. Again, investigate, use your common sense, talk to a conservator if you're not sure. But if it's easy to remove, take it off. Uh, but also if it's like, we talk a lot about if it's really important to the piece, like say this was an artwork created with staples through paper, that's a case where you might have to leave them. But broadly, you will still have the staple holes, so you can still have the information that these pieces were stapled together, uh, even if the actual fastener is gone. And you can replace the fastener with a new one made out of plastic, or my favorite recommendation is to just put them in a little subfolder. So that's really easy, straightforward, no fasteners at all, because the fasteners can still get caught on things, even if they're not going to degrade, like a metal fastener might. So again, it's a situation where, like, in a perfect world, yes, we would take those off. but it doesn't always work out like that.
I'd say that if it was something that was interestingly combined, like one time I worked on a scrapbook that somebody had used very thin nails to attach things, and the nails were beginning to create a problem for the surrounding items. So we did decide to remove them, but because they were very deliberately placed in that spot in the scrapbook, we took photos before removing, and then we were able to get better scans of the particular things that we removed once they were no longer in the book. But we wanted to make sure that we had everything in situ and we had a good documentation of where it belonged in the book, as if somebody had put it there on purpose in that particular spot. So if it's
That's a really great example.
yeah, so if it's an interestingly or uniquely um, fastened object, you want to make sure that you have documentation of it intact, even if you have to remove whatever it is.
Right, so if it's not just, two pieces of paper stapled in the top left
Yes,
corner,
yes, your
to your point, if
typical,
it's a scrapbook with
yeah.
things, arranged in a very particular way, and the pins are so interesting, and you do see that a lot in more historic items, sort of before the advent of the paperclip or the staple, people were using pins left and right.
And paper clips themselves, the kind of clippy design that we all know is newer than the idea of the paper clips. The early paper clips could have all kinds of different shapes to them, and that is a case where I would say keep the original in envelope. If it's not the very typical one that you see now, if it's something that's interesting or might help you to date the paperclip itself, then you want to make sure that you hold on
A
to it.
historic paperclip, agreed.
Yes. And always make sure, again, to maintain the original order and the grouping as much as you can. All right, I think we've covered this one.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to removing adhesive. Can you
All right,
digitize
folks.
documents with tape or adhesives on them? And when can you remove it?
All right, listen up, everybody. Don't do it. And by don't do it, I mean don't try to remove tapes or adhesives. Chances are good you will cause more damage. It's perfectly safe most of the time to digitize documents that have these things on them. The only corollary I would say is if there's any like exposed, actively sticky adhesive that could stick to your scanner or your work surface or any other surrounding documents. This is a case where you can get some like little pieces of silicone release mylar and to kind of put it over the sticky area to just prevent it from causing more damage. But this is something that even for conservators can be fraught and difficult. So maybe just set those aside and say this is a problem for another day.
I think sometimes people ask this because the tape has really yellowed and they have trouble seeing the writing underneath. In that case, I think that's
Yeah.
a job for a conservator. Unless the tape has lost really its adhesion and it is just coming off anyway, in which case you might want to very, very gently
Yeah,
test
if the
it.
tape carrier, so like the plastic part that the adhesive is on, is just kind of peeling readily away, and this will usually happen when the tape is already quite yellow. So if you can kind of poke it with a micro spatula or tool and see if it'll come up, that's a case where if it just comes off easily, that's fine. But again, leave the adhesive there. And to Kaitlyn's point, even if the tapes are obscuring the media, if you try to remove them yourself, chances are good you will damage the media
Make it
and
worse.
make it worse, and it will be even less legible, and then you shot yourself in the foot, kind of. So yes, I have the Ghostbusters logo here to say, who are you going to call? A conservator, please.
All right, bindings. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. Things that have very loose bindings that might be easily removed. Post bindings. Um, anything that's got a binding that is just flaking off. The spine is actively falling apart while you've got it there, and you can see the original sewing underneath.
Yeah, so or things can be in binders, things like that. Um, if it's either easy to take out or very deteriorated, like you were saying, you can kind of remove that and worry less and then have conservation done later. If the binding is in really good condition, but it's just really tight, that's a case where you don't want to like crack it open because then you're causing more damage. So this is a great time to use your book wedges and other supports to open it as much as is possible without causing additional damage to the spine.
Mhm.
Um,
And if something is
if it
very
is, oh, go ahead.
tightly, oh, just I was gonna say sometimes when things are very tightly bound and you don't have a lot of margin room, you do lose a lot of text. And there, beyond having a conservator look at it to see how easy it would be to kind of to do something about that, I don't think there's a lot that you can do as a non-conservator beyond getting it as open as you feel that it safely can be, and using things like snake weights to keep the curve reduced without putting any kind of pressure on the paper itself. You may not be able to get an image where you don't have that weight in the way, and you may not be able to get everything that goes down into the margin. You want to be as careful as you can be. It can be tough to get a really good image of things like newspapers that might be very tightly bound, and you're losing text. In that case, you might want to think about transcriptions.
Yeah, there are definitely alternatives. It is a bummer when you can't get a beautiful, perfect image. Sometimes a conservator can help, but especially if the binding is original in great shape, we're probably unlikely to ethically be able to do a lot.
And you can also stitch images together, which is something that we'll talk about in a little bit. But if you can get, a nice shot of the page itself before it begins to turn into the binding, then you can get one of the side. You might be able to piece it together a little bit. Just depends. Right, flattening rolled items. How can I flatten a rolled or folded item safely before digitizing them?
Okay, so I think that this is a question I get all the time as well. Um, it's hard if you don't have like access to conservation tools to like permanently flatten something, take something rolled and make it just lay flat with no restraint. Uh, but there are ways that you can restrain it temporarily to allow imaging to progress. So for rolled items, first thing you're going to do is like feel it, test it. If it's super brittle and you're afraid it's going to crack, do not unroll it further. Uh, like again, the common sense thing of like, how does this feel? I'm using my tactility to investigate how delicate this is. But if it's pretty flexible and unrolls readily, you can use small weights or like little. I have one here actually. Little pieces of plexiglass which are clear, so you're not obscuring any text. To just weight it down, have it lay flat, and you will have those weights or plexi in the image, but uh, an easy way to get an image of something rolled without having to consult a conservator, then you can just re-roll it, put it back in its box, and it can live probably pretty happily. If it is really brittle or damaged, really consult a conservator. Re and unrolling something that is brittle or damaged can just cause additional damage every time that you do it. Um, so unless it's like, we want to image this and then throw it away, like that's the only situation where I would be like, okay, fine, go for it. Folded items are pretty similar to rolled. Again, investigate if they unfold readily without cracking, breaking, or anything else scary happening. The only thing about them is they will not image quite as nicely once they're restrained because of the hard greases that you'll have. So if you really care about getting a perfectly beautiful flat image, definitely consult a conservator for proper flattening. Because it's very easy if you were to say, just try to pressure flatten something with creases. So just put it under, like a heavy book, like you might do something in your home, to just kind of really set those creases in there and make them even more noticeable. So that's, you can restrain them and flatten them, but only kind of temporarily, I would say.
So we had somebody ask about encapsulation. Is it okay to scan a document in a transparent sleeve to avoid too much handling, or if it is just too fragile to take out? I don't know if this person meant a typical kind of L sleeve where you've got two sides that are joined and two that are open so that things can be easily removed if they're not fragile. Also, especially, I think a little, I don't know how long ago, but I don't think it's as common now, but I've certainly been in archives before where conservators in the past had chosen to fully encapsulate, so all four sides have been sealed. the heat sealed in some cases. And in those cases, you really don't want to try and remove it if you don't have to. So we would say that you can, in fact, take a decent image through the transparent sleeve. I'm going to make sure
Yeah,
that this,
I would
oh,
agree.
yeah.
Sorry.
Make sure that the sleeve is clean and flat. It doesn't have any dust on the outside. It's not wrinkled. Dust is going to catch on the light and it can worsen glare. If you're using a flatbed scanner, you can take a thin matte black paper backing and put it behind the sleeve, which can help to absorb any of the stray light. And it increases the contrast if your scanner has a white back. And if you're using a camera, you can use a polarizing filter on the camera lens, which can help to minimize the reflection. It might not be perfect, but it will certainly help to get a cleaner image without too much glare.
Absolutely. And from a conservation perspective, if something is fragile, yes, please leave it in the sleeve. Absolutely leave it in the sleeve. Great choice. Love that. The only addendum I would like to add is conservators do still encapsulate items. We use ultrasonic welding, which is completely heatless. It's very cool. Literally cool. There's no heat involved. So if something is encapsulated and it just kind of looks like a thin line around the outside, that's perfectly safe to keep in there. I did just want to draw attention to some older styles of encapsulation are done by taking two like mylar or polyester sheets and adhering them together with double-sided tape around the edges. So if you see kind of a thicker, gooier line, it might be worth it to cut those open and remove the pieces because it's unfortunately common that the items in there can slip and get kind of stuck against that adhesive. But if you open something up and it is stuck, what do? You call a conservator.
Should just get you a button. Call a
I have to
conservator
keep saying
if
it.
in doubt.
The number, the number of things that people bring in that they're like, I tried it myself and it went badly. And I'm like, I could have told you.
So oversized items. We had a few questions about this. One person said, please discuss best practices when scanning oversized documents, such as tax maps that might be up to 10 feet wide. And someone else said that they wanted to digitize voting registers that are oversized, tall but not wide. Some have spine issues. What is the best way to digitize these unusually shaped items? So I would say support the document fully, especially with maps and posters. It's very easy to think that you can be carrying it and then it just starts to, you in the center. Make sure that you've got a board to carry things to keep them flat. And you can take scans or what if you have an overhead scanner, not an actual flatbed, or if you have an overhead camera, you can take images that have a little bit of a seam. So you want to leave a little bit of overlap so that if you're stitching them together in excuse me, in software like Photoshop, you can do that more easily. You know exactly where it goes. And that is probably going to get you the clearest images of something that's very, very detailed, like a city map. You probably won't get the resolution and the amount of detail that you want from just taking a single shot if it's very large. So stitching is the way to go to both take care of the object itself and to get the best image. I'd say for oversized items that are bound, you want to make sure that you always support the spine, never force the pages flat, always use wedges or cradles to support it, and make sure that you're doing one page at a time. You don't have to do the full spread. You can just do one single image and avoid pressing on any of the bindings. Anything to add there?
Not really.
All right.
Mostly just, yeah, the careful handling is so important. And this is a case where if you don't have the space or ability to do it in-house, like there are places like, for instance, the Athenaeum in Philadelphia that have like really large scale imaging setups that can help.
And a lot of the equipment that you need to do particularly large items, it's expensive. It's probably not something
Yeah,
that you want to invest in yourself if you're a small to mid-sized institution. And in those cases, vendors are a good thing to consider.
definitely.
So surface cleaning. Is surface cleaning ever appropriate before scanning?
Yes. So again, just be really careful. There are a lot of resources you can find about surface cleaning from conservators. But like I was talking about earlier, like use your very soft, gentle brush to remove any loose grime. Don't use moisture or solvents. Those are things that conservators do, but if you aren't really sure what you're doing, it's easy to make stains or cause more damage. And this is like for like dust and general grime, not like mold or soot or other like very specific types of dirt.
Especially mold, where you want to be careful to protect yourself when doing any kind of disturbing of
Yes.
the mold spores. I also want to
I'll
add,
talk about mold a little more later.
yeah, I also want to add from an archival perspective that I would never want to remove anything that's part of the item's story. So, for example, I once worked with a great collection of protest posters, and one of the posters was extremely dirty. It actually had a footprint on it, like a muddy boot print. And that's because it was used at a march. So that's part of the provenance of that item. It's part of the history of it. But if you have a poster that got dirty in storage or in transit, or because in the past somebody didn't handle it quite right, um, and it's not part of the story of that object, that's when you might choose to clean it before digitizing. Because the goal is not to make it look, brand new or better. And sometimes the evidence of the original use of the object is the most important part of what you're trying to preserve.
I talk a lot and I try to tell people a lot about historic damage versus non-historic
Mm.
damage, or like informational damage versus non-informational damage. Is it like, to your point, is this telling you something about how this piece was used, or could it provide more information in the future? Another example I have dealt with in the past was we had some archives from like a chemist, like a historic chemist, and they specifically did not want us to surface clean them because the modern day chemists were hoping to do materials analysis to see if there were any residues on the papers. So it's important to consider like what might be there, even maybe that you can't see with your eyes.
Mm. Or if two things were glued together in a scrapbook, you might want to maintain that because somebody intentionally put them together. And or if they drew over, you give something to your kids and let your kids draw over top of it. That's it's sort of a case by case decision whether that damage is, as you said, informational.
Mhm.
All right, common risks and red flags.
Here we go.
Somebody
It's mold time.
Yeah, somebody asked, what should you do if something smells musty or it seems like it might be moldy? And when should a
Right.
conservator be called before digitization? And I felt like those two paired up together pretty well.
I agree. I have some beautiful pictures of recent mold damage that I've encountered in my work. The one on the right, I feel looks a lot like a ghost, in my opinion. But you do really want to be careful with mold. Like Kaitlyn was saying, wear PPE, so personal protective equipment, so gloves, mask if possible, lab coat, or just like some top layer that you can have on and then take off when you're done handling anything moldy or musty. If you see like staining but don't see any kind of dimensional mold, like fluffy growths, it's probably old. If something isn't actively wet and has a musty smell, it's likely fairly safe. But if there's a lot of like really dimensional mold happening, or something is damp or recently was wet, this is a case where I would really recommend calling a conservator to help with triage.
Mm.
Um,
And I wouldn't go forward with any kind of digitization because you're going to be spreading the mold around if that's what it is. You're just getting it
exactly.
into
Just kind of
the
rubbing it all over your
yes,
scanner.
yes. So not something where you scan it and then call the conservator afterwards.
Right. And if you're ever unsure, like most conservators, if you send them a picture and say, hey, does this look dangerous to you, are pretty able to at least give you an idea of like, I'd pump the brakes or I think it's fine.
All right. So somebody had asked, do you use photogrammetry to digitize fragile fabric objects such as dresses, quilts, hats, for example? It can be very useful when you're talking about things that are three-dimensional. It's it involves basically photogrammetry involves taking a large number of overlapping photographs from many angles. I was talking about stitching together flat maps. And in this case, you'd use software to generate a 3D model. So it can be great for documenting shape and texture. Sculptures that are designed to be seen in the round are sometimes imaged this way so that you can have the 3D model on the site if you're talking about a sculpture collection. It's great for documenting the shape and the texture. It can be very effective for that. Or with something like a dress where you want to see how it falls on a mannequin, I guess the being able to get the lay of the fabric could be very attractive, but there are limitations, which is that the setup requires specialized equipment, consistent lighting, time for capture and post-processing. There's training involved, and it also involves moving around the object repeatedly and turning it, which can be risky if something is particularly fragile, or if you've got something that the moths have gotten into. So in some cases, flat photography is going to be the safer option, even though it won't get you that additional information, and it isn't as fun for users of your site. But you can still convey texture really beautifully if you're using something like a raking light to highlight the surface detail, and that can help you to be able. So you can lay out something like a dress and use the raking light. You can get some extra detail that way without having to move the piece around or put it onto a mannequin. So while photogrammetry has a place in digital preservation, it's best reserved for very stable materials or as a collaboration with a textile conservator. I know that you said you had some experience with photogrammetry in the past.
Extremely minimal. I did a brief workshop at a conference, but we are edging up on 1 p.m. here.
We are.
we gotta keep going.
All right. So somebody had asked about previously imaged materials. Is it better to use the copies or the originals for the ones with copies? I believe this person is asking if something's been microfilmed or photocopied previously, should they digitize the original item or the copy? And the answer to that is that it really depends on the condition of the materials and the quality of the copies. Some old microfilm copies can, be very difficult to read, especially for newspapers that have very small text. But at the same time, newspapers get very, very brittle, and you don't want to do too much opening and closing of the papers, especially if they were housed folded. So really, it depends on how good the copy is going to be. So if the original is so unstable that you have to work off of the copy, that's the decision made for you. But if the original is in good enough condition that you think it can handle being imaged again, and the originals have, a handprint right in the middle, or somebody missed a page, then you probably do want to consider going back to the original again, especially if it had, marginalia or annotations, things like that. So it really does depend on the condition of the original and the quality of the copy that you could create. So somebody else asked about collections management software integration, and this question comes up a lot. It's a very important one, but it is kind of outside of the scope of today's presentation. So I'm just going to encourage the question asker to email me if you'd like to talk more about CMS. And kind of the overarching idea that I want to just mention here is that you want to make sure that you're recording what was digitized and any condition notes within the collections management software. So make sure that you've got that documentation that's happening. It should be part of your workflow. But other than that, we're going to move along in the interest of time. File management basics. After one has digitized documents by scanning, what is the recommended way to save those scans? You want to make sure that your master scan is an uncompressed TIFF that can serve as the preservation master. You can use that then to create your access files that are better for daily use or sharing. They're smaller. They're compressed if the case of JPEGs. but they work well as access copies that can be put online or sent through email. And you want to make sure that you are storing those in multiple locations. You want to have something that's local to your local server, your laptop, a hard drive, and then external in some way, an external hard drive. And then on the cloud is always a good backup if you have that option, because it's not limited to where you are geographically. So in the case of a natural disaster, you wouldn't lose anything that was in the cloud. You want to make sure that you're recording basic metadata like the creator and the equipment that you use to generate that scan. And also make sure that you are using consistent file names so that you can always refer back to the original. If you look at the file, that the name to that file that you've created gives you enough information to be able to locate the original within your collection. So, wrapping up, top 5 tips. Prepare your workspace, handle everything with intention, remove fasteners only when absolutely necessary, and never adhesive. Make sure that you're protecting the context of the object, and make sure that you pause when you're unsure. Consult with other people in your organization to give you a hand, or a conservator if you think that there is any damage that's going to occur. Anything to add
conservators
there?
are here to help. We're here to answer questions. Like, at a certain point, we might have to charge you, but for a quick question, most of us are pretty generous.
And they love looking at interesting pictures of mold.
That's true. If it's weird, I want to see it.
Well, thank you, Kaitlyn and Chloe. So we're a little over time, but I think we can take maybe a couple, maybe 2, 3 questions if you are available.
I'm good to hang out and do some
Absolutely.
questions.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to go in order and we'll at least try to get the top 3. And if your question wasn't answered, please feel free to email any of us and we can either answer it directly or forward it to the right person. Um, so I have a question here. I frequently come across items that are poorly housed and I'm not always sure of the correct issue. So I think this was when you were talking about housing and housing afterwards. What if from the jump, before you even start to digitize, the
I think
item poorly housed?
that's extremely common. It can be a very good time. Digitization can be a very good time to think about rehousing because you're going through everything anyway. And just for efficiency's sake, it can be a great time if you have the funding to buy better materials. It'd be a great time to add that into the entire process.
Yeah, if you're taking everything out of the box anyway for, more standard size materials like legal or letter size, just get some nice folders, nice new box. Pretty easy and straightforward, but like oversized always gets a little bit more tricky. Nice large folder or a large oversized polyester sleeve are options as well, or just a box. Boxes, love a box. Rigid, easy to handle.
I think this is a related question. What should subfolders be? A smaller size folder, something custom made out of paper or cardstock? I've never worked anywhere that used, oops, sorry, I used these. And I did see that someone had a recommendation to that question, which was using uh, uh, interleaving tissue as and folding it in half as a subfolder. But I'm wondering if there are
That's
other
great. No, I
other
mean, really,
options.
I was using it a little more generally. You might want to use an acid-free paper to create a little envelope. Depending, is it the case of something smaller that's been unpinned and you want to make sure that it stays with the original? You could even have a mylar sleeve tucked in there. You probably want to make sure that the file name indicates that connection as well. Acid-free envelopes that you've either purchased or you've made yourself out of acid-free paper, or having the folder directly after one, and you've just numbered them in such a way that it's very clear that they're connected items. I meant subfolder more in the sense of intellectually a subfolder than physically a subfolder.
I meant physically subfolder. So what I meant was, yeah, using interleaving paper or, like Permalife is one example. to just fold it in half, usually to about the same dimensions of the physical folder that you're using, but it's just a thin, smaller folder that can, or smaller in terms of like thickness, right? That can support those groupings together. So to your point, if you have a few small materials that were unpinned from a page, you could put the page and the small materials in your little subfolder.
Mhm.
Or else leave, and I recommend a folder over an envelope. And here, when I say envelope, I mean something that's sealed on 3 sides, 'cause it's easier to put in and take out and it reduces risk for more damage.
Mm.
Thank you, Chloe. I'll do one more question, and then I think, but there's been so many great questions that have been coming through. So again, you can always email us if you want to keep chatting. We're happy to keep the conversation going. Our next question is, I have found magnets useful when scanning certain objects. Do you use magnets, and do you have recommendations for magnets that would be appropriate for fragile material?
I have not used magnets myself. Chloe, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think this is a case where for things that are like, for instance, really robust and safe to be unrolled, a magnet is a great option. What we use and recommend are rare earth magnets. They're very strong and also don't rust, but we still will like cover them in something
Mhm.
so they're not like leaving any marks
Directly.
or putting something between the magnet and the object. But if something is very delicate, I think you might be better served by either putting it in an L sleeve or using small weights or pieces of plexiglass, because I think a magnet could just cause damage if something is quite delicate.
I'm thinking something like something that is on vellum. For example, you get one of the old deeds that have been folded up, and they're very robust, but at the same time, they're going to resist other methods of trying to weigh them down. They might be
Yeah,
a
parchment and
candidate.
vellum are like
Yeah,
a great candidate, a great
yeah.
example of this. They have huge memory, like they remember being folded for years and years, and that's just how they want to be. Uh, but it should stand up well to being magnetized.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. So I see a lot of great positive feedback coming in through the chat. Chloe and Kaitlyn, I think everybody loved you, so thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for being our speakers today. I also just want to thank Camilla Dawson, who's been behind the scenes with all the tech and setup for today's webinar. Thanks if you're considering a donation to us. And just thank you for showing up today. It was really great to see so many people sign up and then attend this webinar. Um, our next webinar will be working with CCHA on a fee-for-service workshop. That'll be on Thursday, November 6th, led by yours truly at noon. We hope to see you there. And when this program ends, you're going to see a little pop-up survey. We ask you if you want to let us know how we're doing. Please fill that out. And happy Halloween in advance. And hope good luck with all of your digitizing endeavors, everybody.